Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to R2 Technology. I am your host, Ryan, and let's get ready to SolidWorks. In today's Friday tutorial video, we will be picking up in the book on page 206, section 6.1. The book is The Beginner's Guide to SolidWorks 2022, Level 1. And of course, there's always going to be a link in the description where you can pick up the book to follow along. So, with that, let's jump into the beginning, or phase 1 of this part, the worm gear. So, as usual, you'll want to start a new part document, and you can either do that using the template we created, which I suggest, or if you just open a blank part document, that's okay. You're just going to want to make sure you come up here and go into the options, document properties, units, and make sure that IPS is selected. Click OK. Now the first thing we're going to do is modify the material if you chose just a blank part document. So right click on the materials, edit the material, and choose AISI 1020 for the steel, and click apply. And close. Then the next thing we'll do here is section 6.1 on page 206. We're going to begin our base sketch here. So select the front plane, Control 8 to bring it normal to. Select the sketch tab, then choose the circle. Make sure the center point of the two circles in the sketch are coincident to the origin. Click drag out, click and drag out. Then add a dimension to the ID of 0.625. OD to be 2.25, and I'm going to zoom it out with the center scroll wheel there, select OK, and now we're on to section 6.2, page 207, which is at the top here. We'll simply go to our Features tab, Extrude Boss Base, and we want to switch our end condition from blind to midplane. Blind is going to be the default when you first open the part document. But we want to choose midplane, and then choose an extrusion of 1 inch, and then select OK. And then, with our feature still highlighted here in the features tree, click on it once, which will allow you to rename it, and we want to rename this base. And hit enter, hit Control S, save often. Again, you should always save the part as a file name in the very beginning, and save often as you go. So from here, we'll now continue to section 6.3. So section 6.3 on page 207, we're going to do a new feature, which is going to be a cut revolve. So to begin, come over here, click on the right plane in the feature tree, choose a sketch. I'm going to choose Control 8 to bring it normal to. And then we're going to move over to the top of page 208, where we will create the cut profile and the axis. So let's start with the axis. We'll come up here from the drop down, choose a center line, and I want one endpoint of that line to be coincident to the origin, and it doesn't matter which direction I go, left or right of the part, so long as I have a horizontal relation on that line. So we'll drag out this way, click, right click, choose select. The length of this axis does not matter either. Can stay underdefined by this little blue dot here. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out a little bit with the scroll wheel and then zoom back in on this edge here. I'm going to choose a circle, and I want the center point of that circle to be coincident of the midpoint of this edge of the part here, as you can see here. Click and drag out, select OK. We're going to give this a smart dimension of 0.625, enter, select OK. I'm going to click in the graphics area, hit the space bar, and I want to bring this into an isometric so you can see the preview for that. So now section 6.4 on page 208, we're going to come over to the Features tab, we're going to choose a Revolve Cut, and we want to make sure that our condition is revolve type is blind, And you can see here we've got this yellow preview. It kind of looks like an O-ring showing where it's going to cut. We want it to be a 360-degree revolution cut. And it's going to, by default, choose this center line as the axis because it's the only one. If there was more than one center line, then it'd be like, okay, you're going to have to manually choose which one that is. So from here, we can click OK. And with the revolve cut still selected in our feature tree, we can click on it once and rename it Groove. And then, of course, Control S to save it. And we will now move over to page 209, section 6.5. Alright, so continuing on page 209, section 6.5, we're going to do a second revolve cut to this internal part here and on the other side. So to start out, we're going to simplify the view of our model by coming up here in the graphics view to our display state drop down arrow, click that, and choose wireframe. And now from here, click on the right plane once, start a new sketch, Control 8 to bring it normal to, and we will create the beginning of the profile here. So we'll choose a line. We want one endpoint to be coincident to this edge here, dragging it down, click like such. Doesn't have to be exact, we are adding dimensions. We want this bottom line to make sure that it has a horizontal relation and a coincident endpoint to this edge. And then we want to close up the sketch. If you don't close up the sketch and you try to go into the revolve cut feature, it's going to create a thin feature. So we need a closed sketch here. The next thing we'll do is come back up here, drop down arrow, choose a center line, and we want one point of our center line, endpoint that is, to be coincident to the origin. We'll drag out to the right. The line only needs to have a horizontal relation, does not need to have a dimensional length, but we want it to be outside the part enough for reference here. And then from here, we'll go to our smart dimension, and we'll start dimensioning the profile. We'll make this height here a 0.25, and we'll make this width here, or cutting depth if you will, 0.4. And now we're going to move into section 6.6 on page 209 and go to the top of page 210. So on page 209, 6.6, they want to point out in the book that there's something unique to the dimensioning process when it comes to, well, what this is going to be either radial or a diameter. So to do so, what is key here is the first line that we want to select is the center line, but it can't be the endpoints of the center line. It has to be the line itself. And then we're going to choose this very top point of our profile here. We'll select and drag out. Now notice it's going to show the dimensional arrow reference points in between the center line and the end point line here. Now I'm going to simply drag straight down past that horizontal center line here, and you'll notice it doubled. So from here I can click and I can choose 2 inches flat, and now you'll notice something. My pointer icon has not only the dimensioning icon, but it also has a D next to it, which is the double indicator. So from here I can select this bottom line of our sketch cut profile and drag out, and you'll see that automatically it did not reference to the center line itself, but rather double it. So we can click and do 1 inch and enter. And so now we have a 2-inch diameter here and a 1-inch diameter here. You're going to see when that comes through. So the next thing we need to do before we start into section 6.7 is we need to create a vertical reference line, center line, construction line. So I'm going to choose the center line. I want to choose one endpoint to be coincident to the origin here. Select, drag straight up. We need a vertical relation. Again, this can be infinite length, so it doesn't need to be defined with its own dimension. And then on page 210, section 6.7, we're going to use the mirror command, mirror entities. So still in the sketch tab, we're going to mirror the entities. We're going to come to the top of page 211 for this. We've got to select what it is that we're going to mirror. So we're going to choose these entities here. And then what are we going to mirror it about? Well, that vertical line we just created. Because we wanted to cut on the inside of both sides of this part here. Now, this is where it's going to get interesting. So I will select OK, and now we're going to be on 6.8 on page 211. We're going to go into our Features tab, and we're going to choose a Revolve Cut. What's going on here? And just for clarification, I'm clicking in my graphics view. I'm going to hit the space bar. I'm going to bring us back into an isometric. Now you notice the first time we did the Revolve Cut, we instantly got a preview of where it was going to cut. Right now we don't, because as I mentioned before, if you create more than one center line, it no longer has a default axis of revolution. So we now have to choose that. So over here in the properties, the axis of revolution, click on that, and we want to choose our horizontal line, and now we get our preview just like before. We want the revolution to stay blind, and we want it to be 360 degrees. And then we can simply select OK. Now what I'm going to do here is change the display style back to shaded with edges so we can see what's happened here. From here I'll hit Control S, and then we will move on to section 6.9 on page 212. Alright, page 112, section 6.9, my favorite. In this section, we are going to introduce yet another feature that is used to eliminate sharp edges. What is that exactly? Well, let me show you. So, we want to make sure we're in our Features tab for this. We're going to come over here to the middle where we see Fillet. We're going to choose the drop-down arrow and chamfer. Now, in the chamfer properties, you have a couple of options when it comes to chamfer type. So on your own, I recommend from page 213 to 217, you look at the different chamfer types and familiarize yourself with those to give you different options and choices when it comes to being able to chamfer a model. But for this particular one, we're going to choose an angle distance chamfer type. And then our items to chamfer, we're going to select these two edges here. So this one and this one. And again, I'm pressing and holding the center scroll wheel to rotate and manipulate the part to do so. So down here in our distance, we're going to choose 0.1, and then our angle by default will be 45, and we want to leave it at a 45. So we can select OK, and then on page 213 at the top, our part should look like that image there, with these edges here chamfered. So from here, we're going to pick it up on page 217, section 6.10. And now section 6.10, or 6.10 on page 217, we're going to add some fillet radiuses internally here. So to do so, we'll make sure we're in our Features tab. We're going to choose Fillet. And our radius is going to be 0.0625. From here, I'm going to Items to Fillet. You could set the dimension first, and sometimes you may need to do that if you prior had a dimension for the radius, say like 1 inch, because if you select the items and you don't get a partial preview, it may be because you're beyond the parameters, you've got too big of a radius, something's conflicting. So I've made it the habit I like to change the dimensional parameter first, then do a selection. But whichever one works for you in the order. But I'm going to select in the Items to Fillet box, and I'm simply going to choose this face here because I want this edge and this edge on both sides to be filleted. So again, rotating, manipulating your parts so you grab this other face, because you can grab through a part even if you're on the complete opposite side. Something to keep in mind in the selection process. Quite unique. And then we can select OK, and that's going to bring us to the top of page 218, where your part should be looking like this so far. So now we're going to move on to section 6.11 on page 218. Alright, home stretch folks. Starting on page 218, section 6.11 or 611. We will choose the front plane, create a sketch, Control 8 to bring it normal to. Then we will make sure that we have a corner-to-corner rectangle selected for this. And then what they want to point out in this specific section is that when you start, if you click and you drag out on your rectangle, you can start creating relations depending on where you drag. And we don't want any relation to be created by accident. So if you press and hold the control key while drawing the rectangle, you're able to go almost anywhere and it won't snap to a coincident type relation or other type relation. So we'll drag it to about here, click, release, and then we're going to come over here to the bottom of page 218, where now we are going to add a midpoint relation. So to do that, I'm going to click OK to close the dialog for the rectangle. I'm going to then choose the origin, click on the origin, and then I'm going to press and hold the control key, and I'm going to select this bottom line. I'm going to choose a midpoint relation there, click OK, and now we're going to move over to section 6.12 on page 219 and go through section 6.13. So the first thing I'll do is a smart dimension for the width of 0.188, enter. Now notice something. I'm just going to kind of demonstrate what the book shows here. If this top line of the rectangle was below the edge of this circle here, you simply press and drag on it and pull it up above it. We need it above because if you try to create a dimension, it's going to dimension down instead of up. So now from here, section 6.13, we're going to do something a little bit unique with dimensioning again. So we're going to select Smart Dimension. We're going to select this top line of the horizontal line of the rectangle. And then I want you to select the edge of the circle. Now notice, by default, it snaps to the center point to reference for that circle. But instead, hit Escape only once. Now press and hold the Shift key and reselect the edge of the circle. And this time you can get it to do a dimensional offset reference from the edge of that circle. And from here, that is going to be a dimension of 0.094. Hit Enter. And that's going to take us to section 6.14 on page 220, going all the way through section 6.15 on page 221. So now what we're going to do is click OK on our dimension. I'm going to click in the graphics view, press the space bar, bring it back isometric. Now remember, our sketch is made on the mid-plane, which is in the middle of the part, because we made the part on the front plane and extruded mid-plane. So we need to cut through the entire part. Well, how do we do that from the mid-plane? Well, we go up here to our Features tab, we choose Extruded Cut, and you're going to notice in the partial preview it's only going in one direction. So what we want to do here is in our end condition, we want to choose either Through All, and then down here select Direction 2 and choose Through All, or alternatively, if under Direction 1 you choose the end condition Through All both, it will then automatically select Direction 2 and create the end condition Through All both on its own. And then from here we can click OK, hit Control S, and I'll bring it to the front view to show you that it's cut through the entire part. And then of course the last thing we'll do is click once on the Cut Extrude in the feature tree, click twice, and rename it Keyway. And Control S, bring it back isometric, and that concludes the phase 1 or the first part of the worm gear. It's not finished yet. We're going to go into a different part, which is the worm gear shaft located on page 232. Once we've gone through that part, then we'll have the knowledge gained to come back and finish this part. That is all I have for you now, folks. Thank you for watching, and I will hope to see you in the next video. Take care.